Hey folks, in this episode I'm going to show you how to make this radial displacement effect using geometry nodes in Blender. As you can see, it's quite a good effect. This animation loops seamlessly, so without further ado, let's get to it. So open up Blender, go to Edit, Preferences, under Add-ons, type in Node for Node Wrangler, and then enable the Node Wrangler here, and then click this button and click Save Preferences, and that will ensure every time you load Blender, the Node Wrangler will be enabled by default. I'll then click this button here and we'll close the preferences. We'll navigate over to the right over here and click this Output tab, and then set your frame rate to 30 frames per second. I'm using the Layout tab over here. And if you haven't got your timeline open, just take your cursor to the bottom left until you see a crosshair, left click and drag up, and that will open a new window. Click this icon and change it to timeline. I've already got my timeline open, so I'm going to take my cursor to the bottom left until I see the crosshair, left click, drag and drag down, and that will collapse that window. With your timeline open, you're going to set the end value to 120 frames. I'll just scroll up a minute and I'm going to center my timeline. Excellent. I'll now take my cursor to the bottom left until I see a crosshair. I'm going to left click and drag and open up a new window. I'm going to change this window from the 3D viewport to Geometry Node Editor. I'll then select the default cube. I'll then click New, and that will open up a new Geometry Node tree. I'll just hit N to hide the N panel. I'm going to zoom in. In fact, I'm going to drag this screen up just so we can see what we're doing. I'll then take the group output. I'm going to hit X and delete. I'll hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Mesh. I'm going to choose Primitives, and I'm going to choose the icosphere. I'll then plug the mesh socket from the icosphere into the geometry socket of the group output node. I'm going to set my subdivisions to 6. In my 3D viewport, I'm going to hit numpad 1 to go to front view. I'll then hit numpad period to center the view to the object. And in the geometry node window, I'm going to hit Shift A, Mesh, Right, and we choose Set Shade Smooth. And I'll pop that in between the icosphere and the group output. Now to displace the icosphere, we're going to drive this with a wave texture node. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Texture, and I'll choose Wave Texture. I'm going to set the scale to 0.1. I'm going to set the distortion to 12. I'll set the detail to 15. I'll set the detail scale to 4. And I'll set the detail roughness to 0. I'll just drag this over here for now. Maybe I'll drag this across over here. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Geometry, we'll go to Right, and we're going to choose Set Position. And I'll pop that in between the icosphere and the Set Shade Smooth. I'll then connect the factor from the wave texture into the position socket of the Set Position node. Now we need to calculate the position of all the vertices on the icosphere. So I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Geometry, we go to Read, and we'll choose Position. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Utilities, Vector, and we'll choose Vector Math. I'm going to plug the position socket into the top vector of the vector math node, and I'll plug the factor into the bottom socket of the vector math node. We're going to keep it set to add. I'll then plug the vector from the vector math node into the position socket of the set position node. Okay, we're getting something here. Let me just rearrange these nodes. So I'm going to pop that up there. I'll pop that up there, maybe drag this across over to here. I'll then take this vector math node. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate. I'm going to change it from add to scale, and I'll pop that in between the wave texture and the original vector math node. So now we can change the scale of this on the fly. As you can see, the texture coordinates are quite whack. It's kind of like going in one direction. So we need to normalize the vector of this wave texture so that the displacement happens radially from the center pointing outwards in all direction. That's easy enough. Let's do that now. So I'll just grab this wave texture. I'll bring it over to here. I'm going to take this position node. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate, and I'll pop it over here. I'll then plug the position into the vector of this wave texture. I'll then take this vector math node. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate. I'm going to change it from scale to multiply. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate again, and we'll change it from multiply to normalize. I'll then plug the position socket from the position node into the vector of the normalize node. I'll just drag this down to here. I'll then plug the vector socket from the normalize node into the top socket of this vector math node set to multiply. I'll then plug the factor from the wave texture into the bottom vector of the multiply node, and I'll take this vector result and plug it into the vector of this vector math node set to scale. That's looking a bit better. Now we just need to increase the radius on the icosphere. I'm going to set my radius to 5 meters. Excellent. I just hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I want to be able to give this a bit more detail, so I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Mesh. We'll go to Operations, and I'm going to choose Subdivision Surface. I'll then pop that in between the icosphere and the geometry socket of the set position node. So I'm going to set this to level 2 for now. I want to be able to stylize the pattern of the curves on here. So I'm going to go down to where my wave texture is. I'll then box select these 3 nodes here. I'm going to hit G, just drag them across over to there. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Utilities, Color, and we'll choose RGB Curves. I'm going to pop that in between the wave texture and the vector math node. I'm going to add some control points on this curve just by left clicking and dragging. So I'm going to add one there. Maybe I can add one round about there perhaps. I'll add another one up here, maybe drag this one down a bit, and I'll finally add another one up here. So you can see the effect that that's having. Maybe I can drag this up slightly. I'll drag this across slightly. And I'm just going to keep tweaking these until I've got something that I like. Okay, I'll be happy with that. Maybe I'll bring this across just a bit more. Excellent. So I'm going to zoom in to where my subdivision surface is. Now for my final render, I want the subdivision surface set to 4, but this will severely affect my viewport performance. So I'm just going to drop this down to level 1 for now. And we're going to make a system so that the viewport only displays the original geometry from the icosphere. But when we hit render, it's going to render with a subdivision of level 4. To do that, I'll hit Shift A. I'm going to go to Utilities, we'll go to Switch. And I'll pop that in between the icosphere and the set position node. I'll then swap the socket from the icosphere from false to true. We then hit Shift A, we go to Input, we go to Scene, and we'll choose Is Viewport. I'll pop that over here for now. I'll then connect the Is Viewport socket into the switch socket of the switch node. I'll then plug the mesh socket from the subdivision surface into the false socket of the switch node. So I'm just going to drag these about a bit till it looks a bit neater. So essentially, what this is doing is the Is Viewport, which is true, is connected directly to our icosphere. So we're getting good viewport performance, but when we hit render, the viewport won't be true, which is false. It will render out with the subdivision surface at level 4, so we get more detail. I hope you follow that. Let's just rename this geometry node system. So I'm going to rename it to Radial Displace. I'll then go to my outliner, and I'm going to rename the cube to Radial Displace, and I'll also go down here to my material tab, and if you haven't got material, just click new, and we'll rename this to Radial Displace. So now we need to apply the material to the object, so I'm going to hit Shift A, we go to material, and we'll choose set material, and I'll pop that in between the set shade smooth and the group output, and we're going to choose that material, which is Radial Displace. Excellent. I'm just going to do a bit of house tidying and neaten up the node structure. Excellent. So this is my node structure. I'll just hit Control Space to go into full screen so you can view the node tree. Control Space to exit full screen. We've finished with geometry nodes now. So I'm going to take my cursor up to this icon here, and I'm going to change it from geometry node editor to shader editor. Before we continue, it's a good idea to save your project. So I'm going to click File, I'm going to go to Save As, and I'm going to save my project as Like and Subscribe. Thanks folks, you absolute legends. And then just click Save As. On your Principal BSDF, I'm going to set the roughness to 0.333. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Converter, and I'm going to choose Color Ramp. Shift A, we'll go to Texture, and we'll choose Gradient Texture. On the Gradient Texture, I'm going to hit Control T, and that will add a texture coordinate node and a mapping node. And that's a feature of the Node Wrangler. I'll just hit G, just bring these up. I'm going to connect the factor from the gradient texture into the factor of the color ramp, and I'll plug the color from the color ramp into the base color of the Principal BSDF. We're going to change the gradient texture from linear to quadratic sphere. The texture coordinates are off. As you can see, the sphere is coming out from the bottom left. So all we have to do here is go onto your mapping node, and we're going to change the X, Y, and Z coordinates by -0.5. So now if I drag these flags across, you can see it's radiating outwards from the center. Excellent. So for this first flag, I'm going to change this to a blue color, maybe something around about there, kind of a light blue. I'll click this plus button to add another flag. I'm going to change this flag to, let's say, an orange color, maybe around about there, and I'll drag this across closer to the blue flag. I'll then select this flag here. I'm going to change this to a pink color, maybe something around about there perhaps. I'll then click the plus button to add another flag. I'm going to change the color to an orange color, maybe something around about there. Maybe I can drag this all the way across over to here. I'll click the plus button one more time, and I'll change this to pure red. So I'll go to RGB, I'm going to turn up the red, and I'll turn down the green and blue, and maybe I'll make it a bit darker, something around about there. Okay, now I need to drag these flags across just so I've got a nice gradient. So before I continue with this, I'm just going to pop back into geometry nodes to change the displacement amount. So I'm going to take my cursor to the bottom left until I see a crosshair. I'm going to left click and drag across, and that will open up a new window. I'll then change this from shader editor to geometry node editor under the scale node, which is set to 1. I'm going to set this to 5. There we go. Excellent. I'll just reduce this window. We're going to open up the geometry nodes again in a minute. So from here, I can now finalize my color ramp. Okay, I'm kind of happy with that. I want to be able to add some emission to this. I'm going to go over to my Principled BSDF, expand the emission settings. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Converter, and I'll choose Color Ramp, and I'll pop that just below there. I'll then plug the factor from the gradient texture into the factor of the color ramp. I'll then change the interpolation type from linear to constant, and I'm going to select this pink flag on this color ramp, which is at 0.458. I'll then select this flag, and I'm going to type in 0.458. I'll then connect the color socket from the color ramp into the strength socket of the Principled BSDF. I'll hit Shift A, I'm going to go to Converter, and I'm going to choose Math, and I'll pop that in between the color ramp and the Principled BSDF. I'm going to set this to multiply, and this will serve as the strength of our emission. So I'm going to set this value to, let's say, 5. I'm going to hit Control S, and that will save the file. I'll then navigate to the right over here to my render settings. I'm going to change it from Eevee to cycles. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go to color, and I'm going to choose hue saturation value, and I'll pop that in between the color ramp and the Principled BSDF. We're going to set the hue to 0. I'll then hit Shift D to duplicate the hue saturation value, and we'll pop it in between the original hue saturation value and the Principled BSDF. So with the hue set to 0 on this second hue saturation value, and ensure that you're on frame 1 of your timeline. I'll then hover my cursor over the hue value. I'm going to hit I, and that will add a keyframe. I'll then skip to the last frame. I'm going to skip one more frame, so it's on frame 121. I'll then drag the hue to 1, and I'm going to hit I one more time. So by default, your animation type will be set to Bezier, but we want to set it to constant to ensure that we've got a constant rate of change. So just make sure you got your hue saturation value node selected. Take your cursor to your timeline, hit T, and then choose linear. So now if I push play, you can see that the colors are changing. Excellent. I'll just skip back to frame 1. I'll just drag this node down here. I'll then take this hue saturation value node. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate. I'll pop this down here. I'm going to change this color to green, something around there. I'll then take the color socket from the hue saturation value and plug it into the color socket of the Principled BSDF where it says emission. And on frame 1, with your hue set to 0, I'm going to hit I. I'll then skip to the last frame. I'm going to skip one more frame, and I'm going to set the hue to 1. I'll then hit I, and then again hover my cursor over the timeline. I'm going to hit T and change the animation interpolation type to linear. So now our emission should change color as well. They should work as complementary colors the way I've made this. Now we just need to animate the displacement noise pattern. That's easy enough. So I'm going to take my cursor over to here. I'm going to expand my geometry nodes window, and on your wave texture, skip back to frame 1, and then for the phase offset, type in hash frame divide by 19, and then hit enter. Now if I hit play, we should have a seamless loop. The colors should be seamless, and the displacement animation should be completely seamless. Excellent. I'll just quickly skip back to frame 1. I'll just adjust these windows so it's 50-50. Excellent. I'm just going to hit Control S, and that will save the progress. I guess we should get on with setting up our camera and lighting the scene. So I'm just going to take these windows, and I'm going to drag these down to here, and that will give us more space to work with. I'll then hit numpad 1, numpad period, and that will align our view to our object. I'll then hit Control Alt numpad 0, and that will align the camera to the view. I'm going to select the camera. I'll then go to my object data over here, and for the X location, I'm going to type in 0. For the Y location, I'm going to type in -40, and for the Z location, I'm going to type in 0. In fact, for the Y location, I'm just going to drag this value while holding down Control to snap it in increments, and I'll drag it out to roughly, let's say, around about there perhaps. I'll just go to my camera data, and the focal length is set to 50mm, so you can set your camera to 50mm, and then go to your object data, and then just drag it back on the Y-axis until everything is in frame. I'm going to go to my outliner up here. I'm going to select the default light. I'm going to hit delete. I'll then go into my rendered view. I'm going to set my noise threshold for my render to 0.025. I'm going to set my max samples for my render to 128. I'll probably increase that to 512 or 256 for the final. I'm going to scroll down until it says light paths. I'll expand those options. I'll then disable reflective and refractive caustics. I'll then go to my world tab over here. I'm going to change the color to black and I'll change the strength to 0. I'll then navigate to the output tab up here and I'm going to select render region, and that will ensure only things inside the camera will get rendered, everything else will be excluded. I'm going to hit numpad 3 to go into front view, shift A, I'm going to go to light and I'm going to choose spot. I'm going to hit G, Y, hold down control, snap it to the grid till around about there. That should be 20 meters. So if I go to my object data over here, you can see -20. Excellent. I'll then hit R, hold down control, snap it to the grid. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees on the X-axis. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'll go into viewport shading over here, and with your spotlight selected, go to your light data tab over here. I'm going to set this to 2500 watts. I'm going to increase the radius to 5 meters. I'll then change the spot size to 88 degrees and I'm going to give it a maximum blend of 1. I'll go back to my viewport shading. I'll hit numpad 3 to go into side view. Shift A, I'm going to go light and I'm going to choose sun. For the first sun lamp, I'm going to set this to like a bluish tone, maybe something around there perhaps, maybe around about there. Excellent. I'll then set the angle to 25 degrees. I'm going to go over to my object data over here. I'll then rotate this on the x-axis by -10 degrees. Maybe I'll take it up on the z-axis by 20 degrees. The location of the sun lamp doesn't matter. What matters is the direction it's pointing. I'm just putting it up here for visual reference. I'll then hit Shift A. I'm going to go to light and I'm going to add another sun lamp. And for this one, I'm going to rotate it on the x-axis by 170 degrees. So it's pointing up, kind of in the opposite direction. And I'll take it on the z-axis by -20. I'm going to go to my light data tab over here. I'm going to change the color to like a magenta color, maybe something around there perhaps, maybe something around there. I'm going to change the angle to 25 degrees. That will provide softer shadows. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'm going to go into rendered view just to see what we've got. Okay, I'm kind of happy with that. I think we can adjust the color ramp on the material for the emission. So I'm just going to drag this window up. I'll select the radial displace object. And this color ramp here, which controls the strength of the emission. I'm just going to bring this back ever so slightly to maybe round about there. We might need to adjust this on the final render because don't forget we're going to add this additional geometry over here. Okay, maybe I'll just drag one of these orange flags across slightly. Just drag this one down. And on this color ramp, I think I'm going to change the interpolation type from linear to ease. Yep, that looks a bit better. Excellent. Now I want to add the swirly effect in the background, which is basically just going to be a reflection of this object here. So I'm going to go into viewport shading over here, Shift A, I'm going to go to mesh and I'm going to choose cube. I'll then hit numpad 1 to go into front view. I'll hit S10, hit enter. I'll hit S2, hit enter. I'll hit Control A and we'll apply the scale. I'll then go over to my modifiers tab over here. I'm going to click add modifier, we go to generate and we'll choose subdivision surface. I'm going to set this to level 3. I then click add modifier, we go to deform and we'll choose cast. And that will ensure that it's a perfect sphere. I'll then click apply all. I'll hit numpad 7 to go into top view, tab into edit mode. I'll then toggle into wireframe view and ensure that you've got X-ray view enabled. Left click and box select all of these vertices here. I'll hit X and we'll delete the vertices. I'll then tab out of edit mode. We'll go back into viewport shading. I'm going to hit S2 to scale it up by 2. I'm going to hit numpad 3 to go into side view. G, Y, hold down control to snap it to the grid. And I'm going to bring it forward, let's say 20 meters. Excellent. I'll then right click and select shade smooth. I'll navigate back over to my modifiers. I'm going to click add modifier. We'll go to generate and we'll choose subdivision surface. I'm going to change the views for the viewport to 2. I'm going to keep the render set to 2. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'll just increase this window up here. Ensure that you've got your half a sphere selected. In fact, in your outliner, we can rename this object to mirror. We'll add a new material and we'll rename the material to mirror. I'll then hit numpad 0 to go into camera view. I'll toggle into rendered view. I'm going to change the principal BSDF to metallic and we'll give it 0 roughness. Now if I hit play, you can see the patterns are coming through. Excellent. I'm just going to scale this up a bit more. So I'm going to hit S. I'm going to hold down control, snap it to the grid till I've got something that I like. Maybe something around there. If you want to see the scale, I'm going to hit N to open up the M panel. I'm going to go to item and these are my dimensions. Maybe I can set my dimensions to something uniform. So for X, I'm going to change to 80. Y, I'm going to change to 40. And Z, I'm going to change to 80. I'll then hit Control A and I'm going to apply the scale. Now I don't want the background reflections to be as strong as the emission that's coming out of this object. So I'll just tone down the base color on this mirror to, let's say, 0.25 on red, green and blue. Excellent. I'll just decrease this window. I'm going to hit N, hide the N panel. I'm going to skip back to frame 1. We'll finish off by doing some compositing. So I'll just go into viewport shading. I'm going to hit Control S to save the project. I'll then navigate to my compositing tab at the top here. I'm going to click use nodes. I'm going to zoom in. I'll then hold down Control, Shift and left click select the render layer, and that will have this viewer node. I'll then hold down Shift, right click and drag, and that will connect those noodles together. I'll then drag the render layers over here before I render. I'm just going to hit Control S and that will save the project. I'm going to hit F12 just to render out a preview. So I'm just going to hit escape and you should be in the compositing tab. I'll then click N to open up the N panel. I'm going to go over to the view tab over here and we'll click fit. I'll then click N to hide the N panel. So I'm going to zoom in. The first thing I want to add is sunbeams. So I'm going to hit Shift A. I'm going to go to filter and we'll choose sunbeams. I'll just pop that there for now. I'll just zoom out a bit. Shift A, I'm going to go to color, mix, and we'll choose alpha over, and I'll pop that in between the render layers and the composite. I'll then connect the image socket from the render layers into the bottom socket of the alpha over node, and I'll take my sunbeams and pop that in between the image and the bottom image socket of the alpha over. I'm going to set the ray length to 0.5. Okay. The sunbeams are looking quite sharp, so I want a mixture of sharp sunbeams and blurry sunbeams. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to color, we'll choose mix and we'll choose mix color. I'll pop that in between the sunbeams and the alpha over node. I'll then connect the image socket from the sunbeams into the bottom socket of the mix node. I'll then hit Shift A, we'll go to filter, we'll choose blur and blur. I'm going to change this from Gaussian to fast Gaussian, and I'll pop this in the bottom noodle between the sunbeams and the mix color node. I'm going to change it to relative, and for X and Y I'm going to set a value of, let's say, 10%, and on this mix color node I'm going to change the mix factor to, let's say, 0.5. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, excellent. Now we just need to reduce the alpha over mix factor. I'm going to set mine to a value of 0.15 just so it's there but subtle. Okay, excellent. I'm happy with that. Next up I want to add a radial vignette. So I'm just going to box select these nodes here, including the noodle control point. I'll just hit G, I'll drag this across. I'll then hit Shift A, we go to mask and I'll choose ellipse mask. I'm going to adjust the height whilst holding down Shift just to increase it in smaller increments. And I'll do it with the width as well. So I'm just going to drag these values whilst holding down Shift to drag them in smaller increments to around about there. Just drag this across over to here. I'll then hit Shift A, I'm going to go to color, we'll choose mix and we'll choose mix color, and I'll pop that in between the alpha over node and the composite. I'll then drag this noodle and plug it into the bottom socket, and for the top socket I'm going to change this to black. I'll then plug the mask socket from the ellipse mask into the factor of the mix color node, and this should give us a radial black border. Excellent. Now we just need to blur that border. So I'm going to hit Shift A, I'm going to go to filter, we'll go blur and we'll choose blur. Again, I'm going to change it from Gaussian to fast Gaussian. We'll enable relative, and for X and Y I'm going to give it a value of, let's say, 25%. I'll then pop that in between the ellipse mask and the mix color node. Okay, excellent. That's looking good. Okay, I'm happy with that final result. So I'm going to take my cursor to the top and I'm going to go back into my original layout view up here. Just going to go into viewport shading. I'm going to hit Control S to save the project. I'll then navigate over to my render settings, and under your render settings, my max samples, I'm going to set to, let's say, 256. I'm going to keep my noise threshold set to 0.025. I'll then navigate to my output settings over here. I'm going to scroll down, and where it says output, this is where your image sequence is going to be saved. So I'm going to click this button here. I'm going to save my image sequence in a folder called like and subscribe. Thanks again, folks, you absolute legends. I'll then click accept. I'm going to go to my render settings one more time. I'm going to scroll down all the way to the bottom. I'm going to make sure that my color management is set to AGX, and I'll change the look to high contrast. Let's just have a quick preview to see what that looks like. Okay, excellent. I'll then go back to my output settings. Choose your file format. So if you're happy with your final result and you're not going to do any color grading after, PNG is absolutely fine, but I'm going to change mine to OpenEXR, and I'm going to choose a codec of DWAA lossy, and that will decrease the file size while increasing the dynamic range. I just scroll up, go back to my render settings. In fact, I'm going to change my viewport shading. So I'm going to click this button here and I'm going to choose scene world and scene lights, and that will be the thumbnail saved in my Blender file. I'll then hit Control S to save that, and to render out the image sequence, hit Control F12. So I think that's about it. I'll upload this Blender file onto my Patreon. So if you join me on Patreon as a free member, you'll have access to this file alongside other files and assets. That's the tutorial in a nutshell. I hope you found this useful. If you did, please click like and subscribe. It really helps my channel. Have a great day, level up, and thanks for watching.